The challenge sounded harmless when I first heard it. Spend one full night inside. The challenge sounded harmless when I first heard it. Spend one full night inside Blackwood Cemetery, my friend Tyler said, grinning while the others laughed around the table. No running. No leaving before sunrise. I rolled my eyes and took the bet immediately. I didn't believe in haunted places. I never had. Cemeteries were just quiet pieces of land filled with memories and old stones. Nothing more. But the second I mentioned Blackwood Cemetery, the mood in the room changed. Nobody laughed after that. Tyler's smile faded slowly. One of the girls at the table looked down at her drink, without saying a word. Even the bartender, an old man who had probably heard every stupid ghost story in town, stopped wiping his glass for a second. "You really shouldn't go there," he muttered quietly. I asked him why. He looked at me for a long moment before leaning closer. "Because people hear things in that cemetery." I smirked. "Like ghosts?" "No," he said softly, breathing. That word stayed in my head longer than it should have. Still, I went. Around 11:30 p.m., I parked my truck near the woods outside town. Blackwood Cemetery sat at the end of a narrow dirt road surrounded by dead trees twisted like black fingers against the sky. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the darkness out there felt heavier than normal, almost solid. I grabbed my flashlight, my camera bag, and climbed over the rusted front gate. The moment my boots touched the ground inside the cemetery, the gate slammed shut behind me with a loud metallic bang. I jumped hard enough to almost drop the flashlight. For a second, I just stood there listening. Nothing. No wind. No voices. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I forced myself to laugh it off and started walking deeper into the cemetery. My flashlight moved across rows of crooked gravestones covered in moss. Some were so old, the names had completely faded away. Others looked cracked down the middle, like something had forced its way out from underneath. I told myself I was being stupid for even noticing that. Near the center of the cemetery stood a large angel statue on a stone pedestal. Its wings were broken, and most of its face had been scratched away. Not weathered. Scratched. Deep marks covered the stone like someone attacked it years ago. That made me uncomfortable. I set my camera near the statue and checked the time on my phone. 11:47 p.m. Only a few hours until sunrise. Easy. At first, everything felt normal. Creepy, sure, but normal. Creepy, sure, but normal. I walked around recording videos, joking to the camera, trying to prove how ridiculous the stories were. Then I heard it. A slow inhale. I froze instantly. The sound came from somewhere behind me. Soft, human. I turned the flashlight quickly across the graves. Nothing there. I laughed nervously under my breath. Probably an animal. Maybe a deer somewhere in the woods. Then I heard the exhale. Long, slow, like someone breathing through their nose right beside my ear. Every hair on my arm stood up. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I moved the flashlight again. Slower this time. The beam passed over broken headstones, dead flowers, and patches of fog drifting across the ground. Then the breathing stopped. Completely. I swallowed hard and backed toward the angel statue, trying not to panic over something I couldn't explain. My heart was beating faster now, and I could feel sweat forming on the back of my neck, even though the air was freezing cold. That's when I noticed something strange. One grave near the back fence looked different from the others. The dirt on top of it looked fresh, not freshly buried, freshly disturbed, like something underneath had shifted recently. I walked closer without thinking. The closer I got, the colder the air became. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied again. The grave belonged to someone named Eleanor Grady, born 1941, died 1978. Under her name was a sentence scratched into the stone: "She woke too late." I stared at those words, confused. Then I heard it again. Inhale. This time it came from below me. I stepped back so fast, I nearly fell. The dirt moved, just slightly, but enough. Enough to see it clearly. The soil slowly lifted upward, then lowered again, like lungs breathing beneath the ground. My body locked up completely. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation. gas under the soil, loose earth settling. Anything. But then it happened again. Rise, fall, rise, fall. Slow and steady, like someone sleeping underground. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe anymore. Then the sound changed. The breathing became shaky, despair. Right. And somewhere beneath that grave, something started scratching from the inside. I kept staring at the grave, trying to force my mind to accept what my eyes were seeing. The dirt was moving. Not a lot. Just enough to notice. If you stood still long enough, a slow rise, a slow fall, like someone underneath was taking weak, painful breaths. My mouth went completely dry. The scratching sound came again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It wasn't loud. That's what made it worse. It sounded weak, fingernails dragging slowly against wood, somewhere deep underground. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But I couldn't. I stood there frozen beside the grave of Eleanor Grady, while cold air wrapped around me like wet cloth. My flashlight trembled in my hand so badly, the beam shook across the cemetery. Then the breathing stopped, just stopped. The silence that followed felt unnatural, heavy, like the entire cemetery was listening. I backed away carefully, unable to take my eyes off the grave. My boots crunched against dead leaves, and every sound seemed too loud now. Even my own breathing felt dangerous. The second I turned around, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow footsteps, dragging through dirt. I spun around fast enough to nearly fall over. Nothing. The grave was still there. The dirt looked calm again, no movement. But the feeling hadn't gone away. Someone was close to me. I started walking back toward the angel statue, where I left my camera equipment. I didn't care about finishing the challenge anymore. I just wanted to grab my things and leave. But the deeper I walked into the cemetery, the more wrong everything felt. The fog had thickened. I could barely see the rows of graves ahead of me. The flashlight beam looked weak now, swallowed by darkness, after only a few feet. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten instantly. The graves didn't look the same anymore. I know how crazy that sounds, but I remember passing a large cracked cross near the entrance. Now it was gone. The angel statue should have been straight ahead, but instead, I was standing in front of graves I had never seen before, one after another, dozens of them, all old, all damaged, and every single one looked disturbed. Fresh dirt covered the ground around them, like they had been dug up recently and buried again in a hurry. The air smells. These strange too. Damp earth mixed with something sour and rotten hidden underneath. I pulled out my phone to check the time. No signal. Battery at 3%. 11:59 p.m. I stared at the screen in confusion. It felt like hours had passed already. Then my flashlight flickered. Once, twice, and somewhere in the darkness ahead of me, someone whispered my name. I stopped breathing. The voice sounded low and broken, almost impossible to hear, but it said my name clearly. Daniel. I turned slowly toward the sound. Nothing there, just fog drifting between graves. Then, the whisper came again, closer this time. Daniel? The voice sounded desperate, like someone trying to call for help with their last breath. I started backing away fast. My pulse hammered in my ears so loudly I could barely hear anything else. That's when my flashlight landed on a figure standing between two graves. A woman. At least I think it was a woman. She stood completely still in the fog, wearing something pale that hung loosely around her body. Her hair covered most of her face, dark and wet-looking, hanging down to her chest. I couldn't see her eyes, but I knew she was staring at me. Eve. Right muscle in my body locked up. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking badly. "Who's there?" No response. The figure didn't move. I took one careful step backward. The figure took one step forward. My chest tightened instantly. I stepped back again. Another step forward, not walking normally, dragging. Like her legs were stiff. The flashlight flickered harder now. The beam dimmed for a second, and when it brightened again, the figure was closer. Way closer. I finally saw part of her face beneath the hair. Her skin looked gray, not pale. Gray. Like old paper left underwater too long. and her mouth, her mouth, hung slightly open like she was struggling to breathe. Inhale, exhale, the exact same breathing I heard near the grave. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just ran through the cemetery blindly, while branches snapped beneath my boots. Gravestones passed me in the dark, like broken teeth. But no matter how far I ran, the breathing stayed close behind me. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Not fast, never fast. Calm, patient, like it knew I couldn't escape. I finally spotted the front 8 through the fog and sprinted toward it. With everything I had left. Relief hit me so hard, I almost cried. I grabbed the gate with both hands and pulled. It wouldn't move. The chains wrapped around it or rusted shut. No. I pulled harder. Nothing. Then I heard the dragging footsteps behind me again. Closer. Very close. I turned slowly. The woman stood only a few feet away now, her head tilted slightly to one side. Her chest moved unnaturally slow beneath the torn white fabric she wore. Rise. Fall. Rise. Fall. And then she lifted one shaking hand and pointed toward the back of the cemetery. Toward Eleanor Grady's grave. The scratching sound started again, immediately, louder this time. Desperate fingernails clawing from underneath the earth. The scratching underneath the grave grew louder with every second. Not random sounds, not animals. It sounded human. Weak fingers scraping desperately against wood. I couldn't stop staring at the woman standing near the gate. She still pointed toward Eleanor Grady's grave, without moving a single inch. Her breathing echoed through the cemetery in slow, painful pulls of air. Inhale, exhale, the same sound I had been hearing all night. I forced them. Used self to look away from her, and back toward the grave in the distance. Even through the fog, I could see the dirt shifting now, more violently than before. Small clumps of soil rolled down the sides like something underneath was pushing upward harder and harder. Every part of me wanted to climb that gate and get out. But another feeling had started growing inside me. Curiosity. Moma. The dangerous kind. Because deep down, I needed to know what was under that grave. I took one slow step away from the gate. The woman didn't follow me. She only lowered her arms slowly and tilted her head farther to the side, almost unnaturally far, until I heard a soft cracking sound from her neck. Then she whispered something, 3 words. She woke alive. My stomach dropped. The cold air suddenly felt harder to breathe. I looked back at Eleanor's grave again, and for the first time that night, I noticed something half buried beside the headstone. A shovel. Old and covered in dirt, like someone had left it there waiting for me. The scratching became frantic. Scratch. 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 I started walking toward the grave before I could change my mind. Every step felt wrong, like the seam. Terry itself wanted me to turn back. The fog wrapped around my legs, and the silence between each scratching sound felt unbearable. When I finally reached the grave, the dirt was moving constantly now, rising, shifting, breathing. I could actually hear muffled sounds beneath it, tiny broken noises that almost sounded like crying. My hands shook as I grabbed the shovel. This isn't real, I whispered to myself, but my voice sounded weak, uncertain. I pushed the shovel into the soil. The second the metal pierced the dirt, the breathing stopped, completely. The silence that followed was worse than the sounds. I froze with the shovel still in my hands. Then slowly, very slowly, something knocked from underneath the coffin. 3 soft knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I stumbled backwards so hard I fell into the mud. My flashlight rolled from my hand, its beam spinning wildly across the graves before stopping on the angel statue in the distance. Except now, the statue looked different. Its head was turned toward me. I know statues can't move. I know what I saw sounds impossible. But when I first entered the cemetery, the angel faced the entrance gate. Now it faced Eliane. Or's grave directly. Watching me, the knocking came again. This time louder. And then I heard a voice under the dirt, a woman's voice. Weak, barely breathing. Help me. I stopped breathing entirely. The voice sounded muffled, like it came through layers of wet cloth and wood. But it was real. I heard it clearly. Please. Tears suddenly filled my eyes before I even understood why. Something about hearing that voice buried underground broke something inside me. Pure fear mixed with guilt and panic until I couldn't think straight anymore. I started digging, fast, throwing dirt aside with desperate movements while my heart pounded painfully in my chest. The soil felt strangely loose, almost fresh, despite the grave being decades old. After only a minute, the shovel hit wood. Dong! I uncovered more frantically until the top of a coffin appeared beneath the dirt. The knocking exploded instantly. Bang, bang, bang. The entire coffin shook under the soil. I screamed and stumbled back again, breathing hard. My brain kept trying to reject what was happening, but there was no explanation left. Something was alive inside that coffin. Something was alive inside that coffin. Then the voice came again, closer. Now, crying. I can't breathe. The sound shattered me. Without thinking, I grabbed the rusted handle on top of the coffin lid and pulled. It didn't move. I pulled harder. The wood groaned slightly. Inside, something started sobbing. Not loudly. Small broken sobs filled with terror. And suddenly, I understood something horrifying. Whatever was inside believed it had just been buried. Not decades ago. Right now. The crying became panicked, scratching again. Then screaming. Muffled screams. The kind you hear from someone trapped somewhere impossible. I planted my feet into the mud and yanked the coffin lid with everything I had. Crack. The wood split open slightly. A foul gust of freezing air burst upward from inside the coffin, carrying the smell of damp earth and something ancient. My flashlight flickered violently beside me. Then a hand shot out through the crack. Gray fingers, thin skin, stretched tightly over bone. The hand grabbed my wrist instantly. Ice cold. I screamed so loudly my throat burned. The grip tightened harder than anything human should have been able to. Dirt crumbled into the opening as the hand slowly pulled itself farther out. Then on the other hand appeared. And another. My mind went blank. There weren't just one pair of hands inside the coffin. There were dozens. All clawing upward together. Scratching over each other desperately, trying to escape. I couldn't process what I was seeing. Hands. Too many hands. Gray, dirt-covered fingers pushed through the broken coffin lid, grabbing at the air wildly. Some looked old and thin, like skeletons wrapped in skin. Others looked almost normal, fresh, human. All of them reaching upward together. I ripped my wrist free and stumbled backward across the mud, nearly vomiting from panic. My flashlight beam shook violently across the open grave, while the scratching and crying grew louder underneath. The coffin moved again, not small movements anymore. The entire thing trembled beneath the dirt like something massive was trapped inside, trying to force its way out. Then the voices started. Not one voice. Many, whispers overlapping each other in the darkness beneath the coffin lid. Help us. It's dark. Please. We can't breathe. The sound nearly broke me. Their voices didn't sound angry. That was the worst part. They sounded terrified, like people translate. Apes somewhere impossible for far too long. I crawled backward through the mud, unable to look away. One of the hands kept reaching toward me, opening and closing slowly, like it was begging me not to leave. Then something grabbed my shoulder from behind. I screamed and spun around wildly. The woman stood inches from my face. I hadn't even heard her move. Up close, she looked even worse than before. Her gray skin stretched tightly across sharp bones, and dark dirt packed the corners of her eyes and mouth. Her wet hair hung over most of her face, but I could finally see her eyes staring directly into mine. They looked terrified. Not evil, terrified. You opened it, she whispered. Her voice sounded wet and shaky, like every word hurt to say. I pushed myself away from her quickly. What is this? What's happening? She stared toward the coffin. They buried us before we stopped breathing. My chest tightened instantly. No, I whispered. She nodded slowly. They said sickness took us, said we were dead. Her voice cracked badly, but some of us woke up underground. The whispers inside the coffin became louder. Crying, begging, scratching. I looked back toward T. He grave, and my stomach dropped completely. The coffin lid was slowly opening wider from the inside. More fingers pushed through the gap now. Pale faces appeared briefly beneath the darkness before disappearing again under the mass of moving hands. And all of them were breathing. That horrible slow breathing echoed through the cemetery from dozens of lungs at once. At once. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. The sound surrounded me completely now. I backed away another step. This can't be real. The woman suddenly grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. You need to close it. I stared at her in shock. What? Before they remember. The fear in her eyes became unbearable to look at. A loud crack interrupted us. The coffin lid split farther open. One figure underneath finally forced its upper body through the gap. It looked like a woman wearing what used to be a white burial dress, now stained dark with soil. Her mouth hung open, unnaturally wide as she gasped for air. She no longer needed. Her eyes locked onto me instantly, and she smiled. That smile was wrong. Too wide, too desperate. The whisper stopped immediately. Every sound stopped. All the figures inside the cove. Finn became completely still, watching me. Then all at once, they started climbing out. I ran. Pure instinct took over. I sprinted through the cemetery, blindly, while the sound of clawing hands scraped behind me through dirt and dead leaves. I could hear breathing everywhere now. Fast breathing, excited breathing, not weak anymore. The fog seemed thicker than ever, wrapping around the graves until the cemetery felt endless. No matter how far I ran, I couldn't find the front gate. Only more graves, more broken statues, more names faded away by time. Then my flashlight landed on something hanging from a dead tree ahead of me. Photographs. Old black and white photographs, tied to branches with rotten string. Dozens of them. I slowed down without meaning to. Every photo showed a different person standing in front of Blackwood Cemetery. Some smiling, some nervous, some holding flashlights. And every single photo had a date written underneath. My blood turned cold when I realized what they were. People who came here at night. People who never left. A soft voice whispered directly beside my ear. You stayed too long. I turned sharply, but nobody stood there. Then I noticed fresh photographs hanging lower on the tree. New ones, the paper still white and clean. My hand shook as I lifted the flashlight toward them. The first photo showed a teenage couple standing near the cemetery gate. The second showed a man holding camera equipment. The third made my knees nearly give out beneath me. It was me, standing beside the angel statue earlier that night, the exact clothes I was wearing right now. Same terrified expression on my face. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind me in the photo stood the gray woman, smiling. I dropped the photograph instantly and backed away. The breathing returned again, closer this time, not from behind me, from underneath me. The ground beneath my boots felt soft suddenly, too soft. Before I could react, the earth collapsed beneath one leg and swallowed me down to my knee. I screamed as icy hands instantly wrapped around my ankle, under the dirt, hands buried beneath the cemetery floor. Pulling. I clawed at the ground desperately, while more fingers pushed through the soil around me. Pale fingertips burst upward like roots, growing backward. Then faces started appearing beneath the dirt itself. Who? Man faces. Eyes open wide beneath thin layers of soil, mouths moving silently, breathing. I screamed and yanked my leg upward with everything I had. The hands beneath the soil tightened harder around my ankle. They felt cold, wet, human. Panic exploded through my body as more fingers pushed through the dirt around me. The cemetery floor looked alive now, swelling and shifting as buried faces moved beneath the ground like people trapped under thin ice. One face rose close enough for me to see clearly. A young man. His eyes were wide open beneath the soil, bloodshot and desperate. Dirt packed inside his mouth as he struggled to breathe. His lips moved slowly. Don't let them bury you. Then the ground swallowed his face again. I kicked wildly until my boot finally slipped free from the grip below. I stumbled backward across the graves, covered in mud and gasping for air. My heartbeat felt violent inside my chest now, so loud I could barely hear anything else. But the cemetery heard me. The breathing changed again. It wasn't slow anymore. The entire graveyard breathed together now, in long, heavy pulls of air rising from beneath the earth. Inhale, exhale, inhale, example, hail. Like hundreds of lungs hidden underground. The sound surrounded me from every direction. Then the bells started ringing. A church bell somewhere far beyond the woods. One loud chime. Then another. Midnight. The second the final bell rang, every grave in the cemetery shifted at once. Dirt cracked open across the ground. Headstones tilted. The fog thickened so heavily, I could barely see more than a few feet ahead of me. Shapes moved inside it now. Human shapes dragging themselves slowly between graves. I forced myself to stand and started running again, limping badly from my twisted ankle. My flashlight barely worked anymore. The beam flickered weakly through the fog, while whispers followed close behind me. You opened it. They know you now. You heard us breathing. I covered one ear while running, trying to block out the voices, but they only grew louder. Then suddenly, I saw light ahead. A small building stood near the edge of the cemetery, hidden behind dead trees. I hadn't noticed it before. A mausoleum, its iron door hung slightly open. Without thinking, I ran toward it. The air inside felt colder than outside. Stone walls surrounded me tightly, Ed with old burial shells covered in dust. My flashlight revealed faded family names carved into marble. The breathing outside grew distant for a moment. I slammed the iron door shut behind me and collapsed against it, shaking violently. For the first time all night, the cemetery became quiet. Too quiet. I tried slowing my breathing while staring around the small room. Most of the burial chambers looked sealed shut, except one near the back wall. Its stone cover lay broken on the floor. Inside the open chamber sat an old wooden chair, and strapped to that chair was a skeleton. I froze completely. The bones wore scraps of what looked like medical clothing. Rusted leather straps still wrapped around its wrists and chest. Whoever this person was, they hadn't been buried normally. They had been restrained. A tape recorder rested on the floor beside the chair, covered in dust. I stared at it for several seconds before slowly picking it up. The tape inside was already loaded. Against every survival instinct I had left, I pressed play. Static crackled loudly through the speaker. Then a man's voice spoke, weak, nervous. This is Dr. Raymond Vale, October 14, 1978. My blood ran cold instantly. The same year Eleanor Grady died. The recording shook with heavy breathing before the man continued. The town believes the sickness kills instantly, but they're wrong. Patients enter a paralysis state. Heartbeat slows. Breathing nearly stops. He paused shakily. They are still conscious. I stared at the recorder in horror. Outside the mausoleum, something scratched slowly against the iron door. The doctor continued speaking. They buried 3 people alive before we discovered the truth. A loud bang hit the door. I jumped, violently. Another bang followed immediately after. Something outside was trying to get in. They panicked, the recording said. The mayor ordered us to keep quiet. Said the town couldn't survive the truth. The scratching grew louder now. Long fingernails dragged slowly across metal. Then came the breathing. Right outside the door. Dozens of people breathing together. The doctor's voice started trembling harder. We tried digging them back up, but they were gone. My stomach tightened. Gone? Another massive bang shook the door. Dust fell from the ceiling. The whispers returned outside. We're still here. Still breathing. Let us out. I backed away from the entrance slowly, while gripping the recorder tightly. Then the tape revealed the worst part. They don't die underground, Dr. Vale whispered. Something changes them. The recorder suddenly filled with screaming. Not one person. Many people screaming together. The sound became distorted and violent. As scratching noises erupted across the tape, the doctor shouted something I couldn't fully understand, before the recording cut off completely. Silence. Then I heard movement behind me inside the mausoleum. Very slow movement. I turned carefully toward the open burial chamber. The skeleton in the chair was gone. The leather straps hung loose now, swinging slightly. My flashlight trembled upward across the dark ceiling. That's when I noticed fresh dirt falling softly from above, tiny grains landing onto my shoulders. Something crawled slowly across the stone ceiling directly over my head. Breathing hard, I couldn't breathe. I stood frozen in the middle of the mausoleum, while dirt sprinkled softly onto my shoulders from the ceiling above me. The sound crawling overhead moved slowly, deliberately, like whatever to be known I could hear it. The breathing above me sounded wet and uneven. Inhale, exhale. Closer now. I raised the flashlight carefully toward the ceiling, my hand shaking so badly the beam jittered across the stone. At first, I saw nothing. Then the light caught fingers. Human fingers. Long gray fingers gripping the cracks between the stones overhead. My stomach twisted violently. A face slowly lowered into view upside down from the darkness above. It was the skeleton from the chair. Or at least it used to be. Now, patches of pale skin stretched over its skull in wet strips. Its jaw hung loose, opening wider with every breath. Empty black eyes stared directly into mine, while dirt poured from its mouth, and it smiled. I stumbled backward instantly, slamming into the far wall hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. The thing on the ceiling crawled faster. Its limbs bent wrong as it moved like a spider across the stone. Bones cracked loudly with every motion. The iron door behind me exploded with another violent bang, then another. The voices outside were screaming now, not whispering, screaming. Let US in. We can't breathe. The entire mausoleum shook. I looked wildly around for another exit, but there wasn't one. Just stone walls and burial chambers, stacked floor to ceiling. Then the thing above me dropped. It landed on all fours directly in front of me, with a horrible snapping sound. Its arms looked too long, its fingers scraped against the floor, like claws, while its head twitched rapidly from side to side. The smell hit me instantly. Wet dirt, and something rotten trapped underground for years. I tried to move, but terror locked my legs in place. The creature tilted its head slowly, while studying me. Dirt leaked constantly from its mouth as it breathed harder and harder. Then it spoke, not with one voice, with many voices layered together. You opened the grave. The sound nearly shattered my mind. I backed away trembling. Stay away from me. Its jaw cracked wider. She woke them. The banging outside became deafening now. Cracks spread across the iron door, while fingers pushed through gaps in the metal. Hundreds of fingers. The creature suddenly lunged toward me. I screamed and threw the flashlight instinctively. It smashed against the creature's face, knocking it sideways long enough for me to run. I graduated. BB'd the iron door and pulled it open the second the creature recovered behind me. The moment the door opened, freezing fog poured inside, and the cemetery waiting outside looked completely different now. The graves were open, all of them. Hundreds of empty holes stretched across the cemetery beneath the moonlight. Dirt covered the paths like the entire ground had been torn apart from below. And standing between the graves were people, dozens of them, men, women, children, all gray-skinned and covered in dirt, all breathing together, their heads slowly turned toward me at the exact same moment. I felt my knees weaken instantly. Some looked freshly dead, others looked ancient, but every single one had the same expression, desperate hunger, not for flesh, for air. They inhaled deeply through cracked mouths while staring at me like starving people watching someone drink water. Then they started walking toward the mausoleum, slow at first, dragging their feet through the dirt. The creature behind me crawled out onto the cemetery wall above the door, clinging to the stone like an insect. You hear us now, it whispered. The crowd moved closer. I turned and ran. And again. My lungs burned painfully while I sprinted through the open graves. Hands reached upward from the pits as I passed, clawing at my legs desperately. The fog swallowed everything around me, except the sound of breathing chasing behind me. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Hundreds of lungs filling together. I finally spotted the cemetery gate ahead, through the darkness, open. For the first time all night, it stood open. Relief crashed through me so hard I almost cried. I pushed myself faster, despite the pain shooting through my ankle. Behind me, the breathing became frantic. The voices rose together in panic. No! Don't leave. Please! I reached the gate and grabbed the cold metal bars. Then I froze. Someone stood outside the cemetery waiting for me. Oh! An old man, holding a lantern. The bartender, the same man who warned me not to come here. He stared at me sadly through the gate, while the creatures behind me kept approaching. You shouldn't have opened it, he said quietly. What is this? I shouted desperately. What are they? The old man looked past me toward the graves. They were buried alive during the fever outbreak in 78. He said, the two WN covered it up. The breathing behind me grew louder, closer, but that's not what trapped them here. I gripped the gate harder. Then what did? The old man's face darkened. The people digging the grave started hearing breathing underground days later. They panicked, sealed the cemetery, locked everyone inside. My chest tightened. Everyone? His eyes met mine. The living too. The words hit me like ice water. I slowly looked back toward the cemetery, toward the hundreds of figures stumbling closer through the fog. Not all of them were dead when they got trapped here. Some had been buried, some had been abandoned, and some had spent decades underground listening to others breathing beside them in the dark. The creatures stopped moving about 20 feet away from the gate. Just watching me now, breathing, waiting, waiting. The old man lifted the lantern slightly. You still have time, he whispered. Time for what? His expression became empty. To take someone else's place. I stared at the old man without understanding what he meant. The lantern light shook softly in his hand, while the figures behind me stood frozen between the graves. Hundreds of Greyfar. CES watched silently through the fog, breathing, waiting. To take someone else's place, I repeated. The old man nodded slowly. His eyes looked exhausted, like he had carried the same nightmare for years. They don't leave the cemetery, he whispered. Not unless someone stays behind. A cold pressure spread through my chest. No, I said immediately. No, I'm leaving. You opened Eleanor's grave, he replied quietly. That woke them fully. The creatures behind me began breathing harder at the sound of her name. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. The old man stepped closer to the gate. If you walk away now without sealing it again, they'll follow the breathing. I frowned in confusion. What does that mean? His face tightened. They follow the living. The words hit me harder than anything else that night. I looked back at the figures standing among the graves. Some stared at me with hollow desperation. Others twitched unnaturally, their mouths hanging open as they dragged air into dead lungs. And then I noticed something worse. More shapes were rising behind them. More hands pushing out from the dirt. The cemetery was still waking up. There has to be another way, I said desperately. The old man didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly raised the lantern higher. That's when I saw the deep scars around his wrists. Rope scars, old ones. I tried leaving once too, he whispered. My stomach dropped. You were here before? He gave a weak nod. 1979. I came with my younger brother after hearing the stories. His voice trembled slightly. Only one of us walked back out. The fog drifted between us, while the creatures watched silently behind me. What happened to your brother? The old man looked toward the cemetery without blinking. He stayed breathing underground. I felt sick. No. They buried him alive after he opened a grave. The old man swallowed hard. The town called it an accident. A low sound suddenly rolled through the cemetery. Not a scream. Not a growl. A deep inhale from hundreds of lungs at once. At once, the figures began moving again. Slowly, toward the gate. The old man grabbed my arm through the bars. Listen carefully. When sunrise comes, the cemetery closes again. Whatever remains inside stays trapped until someone opens a grave. My pulse hammered painfully in my ears. So we wait until sunrise? His expression changed. Almost guilty. Duh. Riaz one problem. The breathing behind me became excited now. Faster. Hungrier. The cemetery needs a living heartbeat inside when it seals. I stared at him. Number. No way. You're lying. I wish I was. I backed away from the gate immediately. The old man's face filled with pity. If nobody stays, they all walk free. The figures behind me suddenly jerked closer all at once. Not walking now, twitching, like puppets yanked forward by invisible strings. Their mouths stretched wider as they inhaled the night air greedily. And somewhere deep beneath the cemetery, I heard more knocking underground, hundreds of buried fists pounding upward. The old man reached through the gate desperately. There's still time. You can choose. I looked around wildly. Open graves, moving dirt, gray figures closing in slowly, through the fog. Then my eyes landed on something near the angel statue, my camera, still recording. An idea hit me instantly. I ran toward it before the old man could stop me. "Wait!" he shouted. I grabbed the camera with shaking hands and turned it toward the creatures approaching through the cemetery. "If people see this, they won't." The old man interrupted sharply. I looked back, at him. His face had gone pale. Then I realized why. The figures weren't watching me anymore. They were watching him, all of them. The old man slowly stepped backward from the gate. "No," he whispered. One of the gray women tilted her head unnaturally and smiled. "She remembers you," she whispered. The old man's lantern fell from his hand and shattered on the ground. Darkness swallowed half his face instantly. "You left us," another voice hissed from the fog. The creatures began moving toward the gate faster now. Not toward me. Toward him. Toward him. The old man panicked and tried backing away, but pale hands suddenly burst upward from the ground outside the cemetery and grabbed his legs. He screamed, a real scream. Human. The earth beneath him collapsed slightly as more hands clawed upward around his body. "No, please," he cried while struggling violently. The creatures inside the cemetery inhaled deeply together. Excited, the old man looked at me in pure terror. "Close the gate," he screamed. But I couldn't move. I just watched. The hands dragged him downward, inch by inch, while dirt filled his mouth. His fingernails scraped desperately against the ground. Then something horrifying happened. The figures inside the cemetery stopped moving completely. Every head slowly turned toward me again. The old man screamed louder outside the gate while being pulled underground. And suddenly, I understood. They weren't taking him. They were offering him back. The cemetery had chosen me instead. The breathing changed instantly. Closer now, directly behind me. I turned slowly. Ellen O'Grady stood only inches away. Her gray face looked almost peaceful now. Dirt covered most of her body, and her dead eyes locked onto mine with terrible calmness. "You opened the grave," she whispered softly. Her cold fingers touched my chest directly over my heartbeat. And every creature in the cemetery inhaled at the exact same moment. I felt the ground beneath my feet begin to sink, slowly. Soft dirt pulling me downward, while pale hands wrapped around my ankles from below. I tried to scream, but more hands reached from the earth and covered my mouth gently, not violently, almost lovingly, like people comforting someone before sleep. The last thing I saw before the dirt swallowed me completely was the cemetery gate slowly swinging shut on its own. And outside the gate, the old man was gone,